We are back with another episode of The Gold Standard with Charlie Goldsmith. We talk Reds and Bengals on this podcast, and you can make the argument that both could be the lead story right now. But everybody across the country is talking about the Bengals because of what happened with Joe Burrow. So let's jump right into the Bengals conversation, Charlie, and let's start with Joe Burrow. So everybody's got a thought about why this happened and why this keeps happening to Joe Burrow. When I say it, season-ending injuries. We don't know if this is season-ending. He could be back in December. We'll see about the timeline, but it's a devastating injury for him, for the city, for the team. What's your take on why this keeps happening for Joe Burrow?
I want to start with the offensive line, but let me put a pin in that and kind of circle back here. The play where he got hurt, it was kind of innocuous. It was kind of just a drop back where he looks and the hitter gets to him. I think Burrow just sometimes is going to break. And I think this is now just a part of his story, a part of his career, something he has to overcome, something he's had to overcome in the majority of his seasons in the NFL. My big takeaway, the more I think of what happened and what this means for the future is, man, those seasons where he's healthy, recognize and appreciate just how precious those are. Maybe even for the Bengals in the future, that's from a trade deadline perspective, going all in specific seasons if Burrow's healthy and Burrow's there. It creates some doubt if the Bengals are going to be contenders every year because, again, this keeps happening with Joe, but I just keep going back to the spotlight it puts on the years where he is healthy, treating it with that level of urgency.
Okay, so now how can the Bengals going forward assure themselves a higher probability that this won't happen again? And that goes back to, I think, organizationally, their commitment to protect Joe. And look, we can have a debate about was it the right roster decision to sign T. Higgins and sign Trey Hendrickson? That money could have been used elsewhere to build this offensive line. If you were looking at this from the outside looking in like we are, where would you start organizationally for this team to give themselves a better chance to keep Joe on the field starting next season?
Well, it always goes back to the biggest topic, which is how long it took to get the deals done with Jamar Chase and T. Higgins. And then the way they structured those deals, the way the Bengals feel like, in their estimation, they have to structure deals. And the timing there and then the structure took away an opportunity to get an offensive guard who is better than Lucas Patrick. It's not that the Bengals devalue the guard position so much that they're sitting in a locked room cackling about the fact that they can just get by with a $1.3 million guard. That's not how they feel. But it was just the circumstance they ended up in because of the guardrails that they put up for themselves. That's where they landed. They have to, just through the draft, through what they're able to do in free agency, hit more, invest more, be better at developing the offensive linemen they have. You know, it always also comes back to, Jackson Carman and even like a Jalen Rivers. Like, obviously, we weren't expecting him to start, but if this is what you got, your rookie fifth-round pick needs to be further along. This isn't on Jalen Rivers, but it's on the idea of years and years and years of lack. Like, where's the sixth-round pick who's now a solid lineman on the Bengals? They just don't have that, and that catches up to you.
It's interesting you say that because I think, and I don't have it in front of me right now, if you look back the last 10 years, this team has used high-round draft capital on offensive linemen. I would think you need probably two hands for the number of times they've swung at either the first round, the second round, or third round to find offensive linemen, not even just in the Joe Burrow era, but before Joe Burrow. And it just hasn't hit at a rate that they would need going forward. Okay, so if it's not just offensive line, and we understand that that's part of the blame game here. If you're going to spin the wheel, it's going to fall on the offensive line, and it fell on it this time because it felt like they had a Band-Aid playing right guard, and that's the guy that ended up getting beat for Joe Burrow to be sacked. But is there anything Joe has to change? Because, look, this is what Joe wanted, right? Joe wanted T. Higgins. Joe wants to play out of the shotgun. Joe wants the offense spread out. Those lend themselves into maybe him being exposed for more hits, whether it's you're not paying offensive linemen or you're standing back there when defensive linemen know you're going to throw the ball. Is there anything Joe has to change? Because we can't sit here and tell Joe to change his DNA, right? To run around and try to make plays and be himself. But is there anything the coaching staff can do to help Joe next year, changing maybe the way they structure the offense or changing something in his game that can help him stay on the field?
I want to start with something you said, the roster construction argument, and T. Higgins specifically. I think that's the completely wrong way to look at it.
Okay.
I've said this all along. T. Higgins helps protect Joe Burrow because what you want Burrow to do is be able to drop back and just fire the throw. He's not going to do that for Kendrick Pryor. He's going to do that for Jamar Chase and T. Higgins. Having T gives Burrow more confidence running the offense that more people want him to run. You know, the under center stuff. And I also think under center isn't the salve that people make it out to be. It's something that's very week to week, and there are weeks where it is more dangerous to be under center than shotgun. Perfect example when you face the Minnesota Vikings, for example, going back at what the Bengals have done against that style of defense in the past. They've been open to, they've had weeks where they've leaned more into under center concepts, but it's never one, there's something they're going to major in. And two, I wonder if Joe would tell you in certain matchups, if you have me under center 25, 30, who knows % of the time, when I turn my back to the defense against specific blitzes, that actually puts me more in danger to take the hits that everyone wants me to not get. So stylistically, from a structure perspective, I don't see as much. Now, from a coaching perspective, what do you tell Joe? I think that's going to have the Bengals up at night for the next 20 years. Heading into every game, they tell Joe about when and where to be aggressive and push the envelope.
At some point, Joe Burrow will talk about this. He'll be at the podium at Paycor Stadium. We'll have a chance to ask him questions. What are you most forward to finding out from Joe about this experience? What question are you wanting to ask Joe as he gets ready to go into rehab again?
I'm not going to speculate. My number one question for Joe was this just an injury that occurred on one specific play? That's a question I have. But then, yes, does he feel the need? Because ultimately they're going to do what Burrow feels most confident in. Does he feel the need to adjust and change the way he plays? That has risk in it as well. And so that's why I'm not up here saying Joe needs to change the way he plays. But if it's something that he's truly bought into and committed to, well, then that suddenly becomes the story of the Bengals. And what I'm not going to ask, but we're all going to be wondering is, are you just upset that the team pushed offensive line to the side like it did? And he's not going to throw those guys under the bus. But if I could really get a chance to ask Burrow one question, it would be, does this injury change kind of the way you feel about the front office and their approach towards building this roster?
Okay, so it now goes to Jake Browning. The season's not over. The Bengals are 2-0, the first 2-0 start under Zach Taylor. I believe the first 2-0 start since 2018 for this franchise. There's still a pulse. These guys believe in Jake Browning. The coaching staff, the players, I don't think it's lip service. I think that confidence is real in Jake Browning. How real is your confidence in Jake Browning that he can keep this team viable for the next several months to keep them in a playoff conversation in 2025?
Real. And I think the under-discussed story with Jake Browning, something I talked to him about for a while in August before either of us knew he'd be getting this shot, was one, how much he's improved since 23, but I have kind of some specifics here. How much Jake Browning improved in practice since 2023. We saw Jake, he had some moments, I believe in 2023, he had a nice drive against the Falcons in the preseason, but he had a terrible training camp. So bad that they brought in Will Grier to, in my opinion, eventually battle with Jake Browning for that spot. Browning takes over because Grier ends up in, I think, New England. Browning takes over, and we all know what he did during the back half of that season. But Browning had a terrible camp in 22. He wasn't with the Bengals in 21. He had all this bad preseason film. Not with the Bengals, with the Vikings until then. The preseason film was bad. He learned how to practice. And I heard some specifics about what Jake did in practice in 2024 to take his game up to another level. Just, reading defenses, running drills, executing concepts, understanding how one piece of the game plan ties to another, as opposed to just running around and making plays, which kind of is what he did in 23, in addition to having some good anticipation and knowing when and how to chase completions in certain situations. Like, he really played football in practice last year, and he did the same, taking it up a significant level in training camp in 2025. I think we all saw that. So that gives me some confidence in Jake.
Okay, so when I watch him, and again, I'm just like anybody else at home watching football. I follow the ball, I watch the quarterback, I wait for big plays. It feels like Jake takes some more risks than Joe. Am I correct in that? That the football might not always be great, right? He's going to make some mistakes, and we saw that with the 3 picks against Jacksonville, but he also might take a few more risks downfield. And to me, that leads to a fun watch, an entertaining watch when Jake Browning's playing quarterback. Am I correct in that?
You caught me. It's been a lot. The Reds are going on, the Bengals are going on. I meant to rewatch a lot of Jake's 2023 season this week. I haven't gotten there yet. When I look at just what I remember and when I look at the interceptions from the last game against Jacksonville, I think he's just got a weaker arm. Like, I think him and Joe might be equivalent risk takers, but Joe's going to make it right with his throw and break. Browning has physical, frankly, limitations as a former undrafted free agent that he can't just quite get the ball there, even though he's thinking like Burrow and he has the right idea or an aggressive idea in a specific situation. But he has a very clear vision for how the offense operates, for how he operates within the offense, a good understanding of protections, relatively accurate. He's not Joe, but he's relatively accurate. He's not going to cost you a play in a way that, like, we've seen some other Bengals backup and practice squad QBs do. So there is a lot to like with Jake. I just need to go back through a little more what he did specifically in 2023.
One final question on the Bengals. It's Jake Browning, it's Joe Burrow, and it's big picture here. If the Bengals are in this thing in December and Joe Burrow has gone through the rehab and he's ready to go, are you throwing Joe Burrow back out there to try to get this team to the playoffs? And you say yes. Let me just throw this back out there. One thought here before you fully answer is we've seen how much Joe Burrow struggles to start seasons.
Part of it.
You know?
Yeah.
I mean, no matter how much work he got all this work this offseason, right, to get ready. And I know Cleveland's Cleveland, but Jacksonville as well. And it's just Joe gets off to these slow starts. So if you throw him back into a playoff race, are you running the risk of, look, I understand he's the franchise quarterback, he's the guy, you're going to do it, but is there a thought in the back of the head like, oh, maybe Joe will be a slow starter again, even though it's late in the season?
1,000%. Actually, a Reds player and I were talking about this the other day, and he said he's not going to get the luxury we have of a rehab assignment. He was thinking about it in that way. You are going to see December, or slow start Joe in December. And that's going to be something the Bengals are just going to have to overcome. But if the idea is this is a team that's winning must-win games in January, what does Joe need? Reps. Joe needs to play. Joe's not, and also the competitor that he is, Joe's not going to sit out an extra week just so we can see a couple more cover 2 dropbacks. And let's run dagger versus cover 2 a couple more times. That's not what he's going to be thinking. He's going to be motivated to get out there. The Bengals are in the Joe Burrow business, and I think he should and will get what he wants because of how good he is. If he was the 10th best quarterback in the league, I wouldn't feel that way. But as arguably the best, you put him out there.
More on the Bengals when we get to the Gold Rush a little bit later in the show, including, I'm curious what this means for Zach Taylor in his future in Cincinnati as well. We'll get to that in the Gold Rush. Let's pivot now to the Reds. You talked about the conversations you've been having with the Reds on Joe Burrow. Let's talk about the Reds themselves. As of this taping, there are 10 games left in the Reds season. They're 2 games back of the final wild card spot in the National League. Are they going to do this? I keep asking you every week. It feels like we kick the can.
Where's the thermometer?
I know. Where's the thermometer? Okay, let's just start there then. Where's your thermometer? And it's not necessarily a number. Where's your thermometer of confidence that the Reds can actually get to the finish line as a playoff team?
They'll have to have their best 10-game stretch of the season. And that's been kind of the story of a season you hear from their perspective. And we just never got hot. We haven't gotten hot yet. It's never all been clicking and firing on all cylinders for a prolonged stretch at the same time. And there's no better time than the present. But a problem is, like, all right, projecting that forward, while we've seen some terrific starts recently, we've also seen some shaky and some poor starts cost the Reds some must-win games. You know, Friedel and McClain at the start of September, I felt those 2 guys were really coming on. Over the last week, they've been bad. Elly was bad. I actually think Elly's had a better week since he moved down in the order. Obviously, he's nowhere near as hot as he needs to be. But my point is that it's just so fluid. It's all jumbled. You know, Will Benson's not starting, and then a week later he's hitting 3rd. Sal Stewart's fighting for playing time, then a week later he's hitting 4th. Like, this Marte's gotten cold because his strike zone judgment. Like, this lineup is all over the place. The rotation's been inconsistent. Can it all click? Maybe, but it's been a long season.
It has been a long season, and right now the Mets, as of this taping on Thursday before the Reds start a series with the Cubs, the Mets are at 78 wins. The Reds are at 76. That's with 10 games left. If you were going to put a pin in a number you think the Reds have to get to, do you think it's...
Let me see the numbers one more time.
Mets are at 78. Reds are at 76 with 10 games left. Do you think it's 85 84 and hope the Mets continue to play around 500?
I guess 84. Yeah, I'd say the most cautious, what the line would be probably is for the Mets to go 5-5. As much as they've struggled, they're not banged up. They're starting. They have the guys they want on the mound. It's just they're not that good. It's not like they have some huge thing that's falling out from under them right now. Well, yes, that's their pitching. They feel like that's improved some with the young guys they're using in better spots. So it's not like the Mets are on this total. Yes, they're on a free fall, but it's not like this is a team that I think projects to keep free falling. So 5-5, because it is still a team with flaws.
That would put them at 73, and the Reds
83, and the Reds would have to get to. The Reds would then have to get to 83 because they would have that tiebreaker.
So that would be 7-3 for the Reds. So if the Mets were to go 5-5, and it's just those two in the tiebreaker, the Reds would have to go 7-3. We'll see, because we don't know what Milwaukee's going to do the final series of the year, because they've got the number 1 seed. They got it locked up already.
Pretty close.
Pretty close. Oh, yeah, 2-game lead on the Phillies. So the Phillies might make that interesting. But the top 2 seeds do get byes in the National League. So it's dependent, I think, on the Reds' opponents. And then they get a Cubs team today who might be hungover from celebrating their spot in the playoffs yesterday. We'll see. There's so many outside, I would say, influences on what the Reds and the Mets might do here the final week. It's hard to really know what the number might be. But you mentioned Elly De La Cruz, and I think he's such an interesting talking point, because it's September 18th, and the Reds are very much in a playoff race, and they don't have a single guy with 20 home runs this year. That's crazy. I bet if you go back and look at the numbers.
They're one of 3 teams in baseball, and one of them, the Orioles, traded a 20 home run hitter at the deadline, so they don't even really count.
But I would love to see the last team who made the playoffs without a 20 home run guy. And who knows, maybe there was a surprise team here in the last few years, but there aren't many.
Yeah.
And maybe Elly De La Cruz will hit one. Maybe Spencer Steer, I think, is 2 away. Will hit 2 in the final 10, and this will be a moot point. But the point is about Elly. Okay, as you look at Elly right now, how concerned are you for him the final 10 games? Because if you talk about things clicking and the Reds having to win a certain number of games, they need their star to play really well. Do you think Elly De La Cruz, and if they go to the playoffs, can perform like the Elly De La Cruz we expect him to be?
I think they need to keep him at the bottom of the lineup, or in the bottom third of the lineup. It's been a lot of different things. It was the quad, then it was approach and pitch recognition and maybe getting a little too defensive at the plate, and then he probably tried to go a little too far the other way and hunt pitches too aggressively, and the strikeout rate climbed, and you can even see on some specific graphs that showcase his approach, it goes up and down and up and down and up and down in terms of like how he's swinging and what he's swinging at. The approach has been all over the place. I don't think it's any one specific thing, the reason for his struggles. I think in terms of baseball, I think what it is now is the human side of it. I think this is a 23-year-old kid with the weight of expectations, being the face of an organization, who is failing more than he ever has in his life, whose sister died this year, who's had a lot of stuff going on, who's having a tough time, who's not smiling as much, who's not looking like himself in terms of the swaggerous Elly De La Cruz that we see. Not that this is the barometer for how anyone's feeling, but relatively, he's incredibly short in interviews. He's much less forthcoming. He's very quiet in general, seeing him interact with his teammates around the clubhouse. I think this is a 23-year-old who's got a lot going on and who's having a tough time, and you snowball that out together, and he's just not in a spot where you can have him hit third. I think he still belongs in this lineup. I mean, you can make that case, but I do still think he belongs in this lineup for a number of reasons.
Sure.
But he's just not Elly right now.
Okay, well said. Let's talk about Chase Burns.
Yep.
Chase Burns is back. He now has a role that he's pitched, I believe twice for multiple innings each time. Do you like the feel of what the Reds are doing with Chase Burns right now?
The Reds, especially because they don't have a matchup left-hander in their bullpen, are counting on Burns and Burns' upside to be a massive bridge. And something you even saw was they didn't pitch him on Tuesday when they were down to make sure they saved him for Wednesday when the Reds had the lead. He's a high-leverage guy. You can make the case that behind Santi and Pagan, he's the guy you want on the mound the most, even though he's pitched twice as a professional in the bullpen. I think the Reds need to be even more aggressive to make sure that Burns has those opportunities. What I'd do is I'd have Santian not be the eighth inning guy anymore. I'd have him be what they call the fireman, the role he had last year. Follow the starting pitcher, enter the game with multiple guys on base, get you out of the jam, preserve the lead, and pass the baton to Chase Burns for, say, the 7th and 8th. before Pagan gets the save. That's how highly I think of Chase Burns.
Okay, let's pop up the Reds schedule here, the final 10 games of the season, and it starts at Great American Ballpark with the 4-game series against the Cubs. Then it's the Pirates at Great American Ballpark, the final homestand of the regular season, and the final series is against the Pittsburgh Pirates. I just looked today, and these things can change at the end of the year. Paul Skeens is lined up to pitch against the Reds in that series. And when you start talking about a team right now trying to count wins, that's a really difficult matchup for a guy who I believe would be motivated to go ahead and hammer down the fact that he wants to win a Cy Young this year. So it could be his final start of the year. You never know if the Pirates might decide early next week to shut him down. You don't know, right? The final week of the season, what they might do. But this is what the Reds have, including at the Brewers. And we understand the Brewers are such a problem for the Reds, but we don't know what Milwaukee's lineup might look like if they're trying to preserve their guys for the playoffs. Anything jump out to you with the schedule?
You know what? I love doing this exercise. It's incredibly helpful. I think the schedule's pretty meaningless right now. When you look at what the Reds have done against good teams, the way they've struggled against bad teams on their schedule, the fact that the Cubs are coming off a clinching situation, the fact that the Pirates are just free-falling, but they did beat the Reds last time these two teams matched up just because the Reds no-showed in that series. Maybe they're, aside from Sacramento, their most disappointing just arrival and show up into a series at any point this season. And then the Brewers, we just don't know either. I think this is a Reds team that not controls its own destiny in terms of playoff odds, but controls its own destiny in terms of how many of these 10 games are they going to win or lose.
So, as co-producer of the show with you and I, should we not do the other graphics then of the other teams and their schedule?
Let's do it. No, for the other teams, it's important.
Okay.
It's not the Reds.
So here are the Mets, and the Mets have been playing very interesting baseball.
Yeah.
The last, 2 months? The Nationals, the Marlins, I think on the surface you look at that and say, oh, the Mets have a pretty favorable schedule the final 9 games of their season. That includes, if you're watching this later today, they do have one more game with the Padres on Thursday. We're taping this on Thursday. That's not an easy game. But you've mentioned to me the Marlins might be interesting for the Mets. Why is that?
The Marlins are a pesky lineup that makes contact, that uses the whole field, and has kind of the great young energy to match the young energy in the Mets rotation. Like the Mets rotation versus the Marlins lineup, just call it the AAA World Series, because that's what they. And I like Tong, I like McLean, I like Sproat, I like Ramirez, and I like Edwards in Miami. But these are young guys who are letting it rip, who are kind of just great top prospects, but AAA players. And except this counts a lot. I think the Cubs too. When you look at their lineup depth, that's a bad matchup for a Mets team that would like to be able to take some of the stress off the young starting pitchers that they're counting on.
And isn't it interesting that the Mets, with this payroll, this massive payroll now, is relying upon guys who are all pitching in the minor leagues, just a couple of months
That's why
ago?
they're paying however much they're paying to, they took the Brewers president of baseball operations to actually build an organizational structure around that. Here's a storyline.
Okay.
You remember Eric Jagers?
Sure.
Former Reds assistant pitching coach, got hired by the Mets to be their director of minor league pitching development. So he's a character in all this.
Yes,
he's got a lot on his plate.
Yes, he does. Okay. Now, the wild card I would throw into the wild card is the San Francisco Giants, because they do have the 4 games against the Dodgers. That's at L.A. That's very hard to do. But everybody's going to circle that final series. And if they're within a game or 2 of either the Mets, the Diamondbacks, or the Reds, if they could sweep the Rockies, those are 3 gold brick games that the Giants could bank as of right now. And listen, the Rockies have been functional in the second half. They were abysmal. They were abysmal in the first half. They've been competitive, at least. I think maybe I'm giving them a little bit much there. But that, to me, is interesting, watching what the Rockies have. Let's finish with the Diamondbacks. And the Diamondbacks are very much a part of this, but wow, that's hard. You play the Phillies, the Dodgers, the Padres. I would say 3 of the 4 best teams in the National League right there with the Chicago Cubs and the Milwaukee Brewers. So maybe 3 of the 5 best teams in the National League. So I don't think the Diamondbacks are going to hang on. Maybe they get randomly high, but you saw the Padres recently, and who would have thought that, the Diamondbacks, who would have thought the Diamondbacks would be a part of this just a couple of weeks ago?
That team was dead. And then they took a series against the Reds, but a lot of dead teams have taken a series against the Reds this season. Their pitching was anonymous. A lot of guys just didn't look sharp. There wasn't an energy. There wasn't an aggression in terms of their style of play that had been synonymous with Arizona. You know how they were like the running Reds in Cincinnati,
Yeah.
and that used to be the Reds thing? What they always said was, the Diamondbacks are the team that does this better than we do. Like, the Diamondbacks were the team that took that aggressive base running style up even another gear, and it had looked like they had lost that. But clearly it's all been firing now. They've had a couple of their veterans come back and step up, and I give them a lot of credit for being back in this conversation.
Okay, let's go to the Gold Rush now. We'll finish with rapid-fire questions for Charlie before the Gold Nugget and a great story he's working on. So in the Gold Rush, we did this last week. Let's do this again. Stock up 2 weeks after the Bengals. I'll give you mine. Jordan Battle right
Great
now
one.
has been playing great football, the best football I've seen him play. I didn't know he was capable of this level. So that would be my stock up with the Bengals after 2 weeks. Who is yours?
I'm going to go Dax Hill. Gave up a couple catches on Sunday against the Jaguars, but arguably the play of the game was Browning throws, I believe, that pick on the second to last series. There's that turnover. Yes, he throws the pick. The linebacker he just didn't see. He misses him. Big return. The kind of moment that loses you a game. The Jags are on like the 12. First down, run, Dax in the slot, races through like three guys, tackle for loss, 4 yards in the backfield, kills the whole series. Sure, then 2 more drops killed that series as well. But the Jags made mistakes, but the Bengals had to put them in a position to make mistakes. And they were there because of that play by Dax Hill, who also had an interception in that game.
Okay, stock down. If you're going stock up for Dax Hill, and I think that's a great call, who are you stock down on after 2 weeks?
The interior pass rush and the defensive line rotation as a whole, especially now with Shamar Stewart, their best interior pass rusher. He's been out with an ankle injury. I expect him to miss this week as well. Osai's had a moment or two, but hasn't consistently popped enough. He did help set up a pick, but you'd like to see more from him on the interior, on third downs. They've played Chris Jenkins a lot in that role. He hasn't had a good start to the season after it was a fantastic training camp. B.J. Hill, I didn't notice as much in week 2. I'll have to go more and check more out there in terms of B.J. Hill as a pass rusher, but he has to continue to ascend. So it was a flaw we talked about all offseason, especially if Stewart's out. That's something that'll be even more of a concern.
A key to beating the Minnesota Vikings. What is that to you?
You ready? You ready for? I'm full cliche pilled. The turnover battle.
Okay.
I mean, let's be real. These are 2 backup quarterbacks against especially a Vikings defense that's going to be incredibly aggressive, and a Bengals defense that I think is going to sell out or try to sell out to stop Justin Jefferson, because what else is worrying you? Also a Bengals defense that'll probably throw a lot mentally at the Vikings offensive line because of how banged up they are. So there's going to be a lot of complex stuff going on. Can you manage the game? Can you stay efficient? Can you give your defenses chances to make plays? The best way to do that is by being in favorable positions yourself offensively, and that's not turning the ball over.
I think this is a head coach, coordinators under the spotlight kind of game to see what side can come up with the best game plan to win this kind of game, considering both teams have so many injury flaws because of what happened last week. That leads me to Zach Taylor, and I know this isn't a rapid-fire question. It's probably a pretty long answer in return to this one. Does Zach Taylor now get a pass for this year? Because he was under a warm seat, right, to figure this thing out 2 straight years without making the playoffs. I think most people would bet that the Bengals don't make the playoffs. I still think they have a reasonable shot with Jake Browning and a 2-0 start, but does he get a pass because Joe Burrow is likely to miss most of the season?
If the offense and the culture collapses and they lose they lose that many games, of course it's a conversation. I'm betting on this coaching staff. Like, this is something I genuinely believe. This has been a very, very good coaching staff every single season, finding adjustments, finding scheme changes, finding wrinkles, finding new things, evolving on the fly, whether it's been with Joe Burrow or Jake Browning. Like the film shows, that's something this coaching staff has done very well. So I think that gives them a nice starting point. Like, how I look at this is, you know, like, everyone talks about Kevin O'Connell. What a great environment he creates for quarterbacks. That's where you want to go. Be with Kevin O'Connell. Zach doesn't get any of that because he is Joe Burrow. But if he continues to have success with Jake Browning, do people start to look at him in that way? I think that is more likely than the hot seat stuff, which is a possibility. But if I'm making a prediction, I lean more the other way.
It might be a world where people said, look what Brian Callahan did with Jake Browning, and it got him a head coaching job in Tennessee. So maybe that finally Zach Taylor might get a little credit for the quarterback success if Jake Browning has success now as the Bengals starting quarterback for the foreseeable future. Okay, Gold Nugget time. This is when we dive into Charlie's notebook for a great story you're working on, a great interview you've done. What's in the Gold Nugget notebook of Charlie Goldsmith this week?
So I'm interviewing Mike White yesterday.
Yeah.
And, you got to talk about the Mike White game against the Bengals. Of
course.
And he reminded me of the Philly special that, if you don't, I didn't remember.
It was a two-point conversion, right?
Two-point conversion that the Jets executed in that game, biggest play of the game. And the corner and coverage there was Eli Apple. Apple was later teammates with Mike White in Miami. And Mike said every time I saw him, I'd say, I lost Eli, I got you, Eli, you can't guard me. And as I said to Mike, we love Eli Apple here in Cincinnati. That he represented, man, you did not want to mess with the Bengals defense back then. But as the kids would say, Mike White wanted the smoke. And he sure got it by reminding Eli of that catch that he allowed.
Outstanding. Great nugget to finish the show. If you want to read all of Charlie's work, you can go to our website and find Charlie's chalkboard right there on fox19now.com/sports. Also get the Fox 19 Now Sports app to keep up with everything Charlie is writing as well. We are back next week. And next week, who knows where the Reds might be in this playoff race? Who knows what the Bengals will look like? Could they be 3-0 after going to Minnesota and playing the Vikings on the road this coming Sunday? For Charlie Goldsmith, I'm Joe Daneman. We will talk to you next time on another episode of The Gold Standard on Fox 19 Now.